flight. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before you all sit down, would you all join me in a moment of silence for those poor individuals that are in the Ukraine tonight, suffering and wondering if they're going to see tomorrow. Thank you. Joel has said he will not be attending tonight. He has a family matter to take care of. So you'll have to endure my attempts. So we are here tonight, again, to pick up on the timeline that our campaign manager has put together. And for everybody's sake, Dick, do you want to go around the room again and have everybody introduce themselves? Think you know everybody? Next one of our fine people that are watching and from a city of Worthing.
Keeping an eye on you.
Hey, you know, there's a lot of people that are doing that, Nick. Right over here. That's the first words out of Paul's mouth. Got to keep an eye on you, you know?
In a good way, though.
Sounds like I'm back in high school. Anyway, did you want to, you have any other comments or any questions before we begin? And I'm going to turn that over to Dick, and he's going to go through the campaign dates and the progress that we've made. Is there any specific questions or anything? If not, Richard, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I'm Dick Strasberg with Integra Group. And let's first run through the schedule. I'll pull it up here, update it a little bit. Okay, so the intent of this schedule is to just bring all of you up to speed on the process. The goal is that this is about a 120-day process, and I'll review just a little of the work that's been done and kind of a timeline of where we go from here. And this ties just directly to our contract, too, so the numbers on it tie to a scope of work that's in our contract. Okay, so first we reviewed the project history. We went through and discussed committee involvement, Citizens Committee involvement, and also commissioner involvement. And the way we've are going with the commissioners is to have at least 2 commissioners involved in the various tasks that we have. For example, the initial task is getting the architect and the contractor on board. That'd be Commissioner Lundeen and Commissioner Ahrens, along with the committee and other members that you'd want to see on it as a committee and as commissioners. Okay, so then we've gone through with some financial analysis, just understanding more your general track structure and where you currently stand, other obligations. So tonight we're at the point of identifying potential sites. So that's what the bulk of this evening will be. I think we should try and just focus on that. There's lots of things to discuss on the project, but I think tonight's task is to identify sites. And also if there's any sites that we're throwing out there that should not be on the list, we should take them off the list, and then we should add other sites that should be on the list. Now, we actually don't have to select a short list until we get down the road here, until we get really towards the end of, really a month from now. And the reason we want to have it so that by the time we hire the architect, we want to have a shortlisted sites, a minimum of 2, maybe 3 or 4. And then with each site, we'll go through and start doing a financial analysis on it. See what the property value is, and see where that's at. But probably equally important in this town, I think, is where is it at with the sewer, water, and the connection to utilities, because that may be a big factor here. So we'll look at that with each site, and the goal on it would be is that we then come back, provide the architects some sites to consider, and then we start honing in on it as it goes through the design process. Okay, so on the design and architect engineering selection process, right now there is a RFP out on your website right now for architects and for contractors. Proposals are due March 3rd, on Thursday for the architect. And then it'll be shortlisted next week. And then interviews the week of the 14th. Now, what we're running into, and we anticipated we might do this, is we've got spring breaks. So we've got to work around that, a lot of vacations, and for the architects, and same with the contractors. So the schedule for the contractor, the proposals are due Monday, March 14th. And then we would shortlist the week of the 21st, and we'd have interviews the week of April 4th. And this is all subject to availability of who's available and the committee having the committee available. We do suggest that we probably throw out some dates after tonight and just have it so we can start getting it on people's calendars. And we just went through this in Brookings, and we had it all worked out with the people on the selection committee. Then the architects come in, and many of the architects, it didn't work with their schedules. So we will be flexible within that, and that could affect our timeline by a week or two. Okay, so the goal would be that we do the interviews, as I mentioned, on the week of the 14th for the architect, and then the following week, get the award, get it in place, bring it in front of the commissioners. And we know that within the schedule that you've got, we may have to shift this a week or so to accommodate schedules, but the goal would be to kick off the design and then shortlist the contractors at that time. So now when we start the design process, what our recommendation is they go through and review everything that's been done. There's been a lot of good thinking done to date, so it'd be going through and reviewing that. And we've put in the RFP that it will be looking at courts, sheriff's office, and a jail. And the overall plan we are on is to give consideration to each of those, price them up with variables, because it's courts, how many courtrooms? And if it's jail, how many cells, and how long do you go out? And one thing comes down on it with your county is how confident are you in your growth? You've got, a very fast-growing county, and how far do you lean into that? Do you lean into it, 10 years? Do you lean into it 15 or 20, or how far out do you go? And obviously the price goes up. Given your growth in your county, it goes up quite a bit as the further out you go. So then we go through that design process, and then about halfway through that, we want to make sure we've got a contractor on board to start pricing up actual scenarios. Just starting to give ballpark prices. This isn't going to be, detailed pricing, but it's good to have them involved, because if we're going in a direction that's going to be more expensive than another, we want to know about it and get that input as we go. And it's it's about a 7-8 week process here of the design, and it probably involves somewhere around a meeting every other week. So there's probably 4 meetings that we'll have with the committee and commissioners, and work through that process. And then when we get completed with that, the goal is to have scenarios. So let's just say scenario 1 is courts only. Scenario 2 is courts plus the sheriff's office. Scenario 3 is courts plus a jail. And that all sounds easy until you get the variables in there of how much, how many cells, how many courtrooms, all that. So we'll include that as well. Then we want to give the selected contractor time to get out in the market and really look at this with subcontractors too, to get hone in more on the costs on it. And what we'll be doing at this point, it won't be designing the building, it'll be a conceptual design. So it's not going to identify every room, everything, but what we need to do is get it so it's honed in enough to know how many square feet, and the general nature of it. Is it precast concrete, or is just some general parameters on it. So that way we have it so that by middle of May we're going to start knowing what these options cost and what the scenarios cost. And I put this value engineering in there, the one that's labeled number 7 there, value engineering. And that's just an industry term for cost cutting, because what we end up with on every one of these projects is, what you want up front, it really sorts out what are the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves. So because what we're seeing, it used to be, early in my career, I'd say that would be, you might have to take out 5 or 10%. We're seeing ones where we have to take out 30%. And, at least vets it out. And it's not making final decisions, because maybe what you do is you go with a higher number and you build it out further. But we want to give an opportunity to really vet it out and to see if there's other ideas that are are more cost competitive. So after we kind of put everything together, we'll put together the schedule, a master budget that includes construction, includes everything. And then do the financial modeling. At the end of the day, what does it cost the taxpayers and what does it look like? And that with each of the scenarios. So the whole goal here is to position the commissioners with all the data and the facts they need to sort out what would be a good decision. And it's not just taking one path, it's looking at all these. Look at all what's involved, and we'll come back to, we'll work with Sherry to figure out in terms of what does it mean with your other debt you've got, and how does that all pan out. So that's kind of the heavy lifting at the end of it, those weeks. It'll be, mid-May, we'll really drill into it. And then we've got this is a committee and the commissioners decide in terms of public engagement, how much and when and how, because we want to show, we want to have everything open to the public and as much input and involvement. There will be, at the end of it, we always put public engagement in. And really what it means is educating the public about the options here. Mm-hmm. It means what does it cost? What is it option A versus B versus C? What does it cost? So that way, when you've got the decision at the end of May as commissioners, you've got public input as well. So that's an overview of the process. Any questions on that?
So Dick, every one of those options you mentioned would be, include a public safety center with courtrooms, and then you add A or B or C or D, mm-hmm. and then you analyze each one of those, give a cost analysis on all those.
Correct.
So that it's able to determine at the end what makes the most feasible economic sense on the long run over the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's correct. And what will be a variable, you mentioned 10 years, and that on a typical project, that's debated. Is it for 10 years? Is it for 15?
Well, I imagine this one's going to be for 20, but I'm just throwing out,
Yep.
thinking of the next census when we'll be at
right.
90-some thousand people.
That's right. So that's what we got to look at, and we'll come back to the commissioners, and you'll have to decide how far do you want to go out with it and how long do you want to build it for. Because the public will consider it to be a mistake if you add on, sort of too soon, and they'll consider it a mistake if you push it out too far. And, things have changed. I mean, back when these courthouses, the grand courthouses were built in the early 1900s, it was town center of the town, and they were very proud of their courthouse, and it got to be a kind of almost a status symbol for the community that we are the county seat, and it's got that as a real big deal. And they looked out, I don't know, they must have been looking out, 40, 50 years or more, because a lot of them are still functioning as is, literally 100 years later. So, and it's just a question of what are the taxpayers today willing to pay for. Yeah. So the goal is that we just get you information. We aren't making any decisions on this in terms of just one solution. We want to equip you with all the facts for these various scenarios. And same with the sites. Consider these sites, look at the sites, and all sites are not created equal. That's kind of the understatement on it. When you get utilities, soil conditions, some of those things involved. Okay? Any other questions? If not, we will jump into the sites. Now, this was put together we needed to get ourselves up to speed on this. So we contacted the mayor and took a drive with her and Commissioner Gibbons and took a drive and spent a morning out looking at sites. So we're going to just talk about we have 5 sites that they identified. The goal tonight is, should we take any of these sites off, and should we add other sites? And if there are other sites that are a maybe after tonight, then we'll go investigate those and start looking into them. As far as the size of the site, the architects will help define that. Given the growth of this county, we'd suggest more land rather than less, planning out over the long haul here. And but I think we'd throw out just 20 acres might be a minimum. And then we can hone in on that as we start actually laying out sites. Are you 1-story, are you 2-story, are you this, are you that? We can start to, hone in on it. But if we look at site A, and that is the county-owned land that is directly south of the maintenance facility. Okay, and that site, we're told, is 30 acres. And, you know, we always note if there's houses across the street, what's around it? Is it industrial, or what is it? We got the houses across to the west. There's no water and sewer currently servicing this site. It's accessed off of 478th Avenue. But it's got, you know, it's adjacency to 218, and it's 18 and 11, basically. So why don't I run through them all, and then we can have a discussion on kind of each one. Then we've got, we put Site B as the Darcy Johnson property. And it is, you know, I don't think,
Dick,
we don't have that located,
Dick,
right?
can I go back 1 minute? John, are there any surprises on A, like lowland or any
You know-
issues?
You know, a site, just, you know, we'll get into it when we hone into the site more, but, you know, this flood that you had in 2014, that's, you know, that's a concern.
Okay.
I know it might be a 100-year flood, but this building isn't going to be designed for the next, you know, 10 years. That wasn't not very long ago. So we definitely want to consider that and make sure that we're, you know, really do our due diligence on it and have the engineers look at it and provide that kind of information. And
But
we got,
according to this, Site A didn't flood in 2014.
we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't know. We've, this is where we have to go to kind of the next level.
Okay.
And that's why we need to have multiple sites to really hone in on it. We aren't aware that it was, or weren't told that it was. The Darcy Johnson property, we're told at the south end of that, there's a creek that runs through there. And that was the low point. So we need to really drill into that.
Okay.
And the, you know, the size of the Darcy Johnson site, it's more than, it appears to be more than 30 acres, but that's the next step we gotta get into, is figure out how much of it we'd have, where we'd be on the site, what do we need to do for utilities. On that is, and also, you know, in terms of, we haven't had any discussions with Darcy Johnson, but he laid out that proposal earlier to you. A lot of positives there to consider. I'm sure there's negatives as well, but we want to uncover what's out there. Okay, then we went to Site C is a site that CHS owns. And this site is, we were told it may have access to water, probably not sewer, 20 acres. Houses on 3 sides of it. And, you know, it's kind of off of 18. It's a block or so north of 18.
Is that on a township road?
That is it's on 480th Avenue. Does someone know if that's a county road?
I think isn't it north there from Canton Motors, old
Yeah.
Peltiers?
That
Right
would
there,
be
that corner.
from the, well, for us Canton folks, the old Peltier Collision Center corner to about a quarter-mile north. That's actually a city street. North of that, then, it would be a township.
So that's a site to consider.
But Dick, my question there, just the way the layout, but that's not adjacent to 480th Avenue, or it is? Because to me, it looks like it's not where
Yeah,
that.
we believe it is. Yeah, it's on.
So it is, right.
yeah.
Okay, that was my understanding, but it didn't appear that way on
Yeah,
the
this has a sort of a property line. I don't know if that's city limits or how that is, where the line that designates around the property.
Okay,
But it's, our understanding is it's just right off of 480th. Okay, and then Site D is right north of the ball fields. And, yeah, directly north. And that site is, we think it may be about 40 acres. It might have water, it may need a lift station to get sewer. The school's on the south side, houses across the street to the east. And it is, you know, the there's more housing slated in this area, access off of 481st. And a lot of this, we obviously need more research on it. This was from driving around one morning, but we're just kind of throwing out the ideas on these sites. Okay, then the next one, last one was the 4-H grounds, right, north of the hospital, kind of a long, narrow site. And it's another one to consider. So the question is on this is, what other sites should be considered? And are there any of these that we think are not going to rise to, say, the top three? Okay.
Dick, I'm going to take a stab at Site D with a school on the south side. We had a site that was about 1.5 miles from a school, and we were roundly criticized for having a facility that close to any public entity. So if this thing has a school on the south side, I mean, we're bumping right up against them. We're just about like Union County. So my question would be, if the voters looked at that, would they even want to consider to have a jail or a facility of incarceration so close to a school? I mean,
I think that's a very legitimate question and something that'll have to be considered.
Yeah.
And also, there's over time this changes. I grew up in Clear Lake, a farm near Clear Lake. I went to Clear Lake High School. Across the street was the courthouse, and never had the thought. And from a public safety perspective, I think it takes a rather dim bulb to be a criminal that you're going to do something across the street. But the judges could maybe comment more on that in terms of what you see. But that's definitely a consideration. And do you want to have that next to a school, especially when you've got other options? So that's definitely something to consider.
Can you guys hear me or not?
There,
There we
now
go.
it's on.
there you go.
So I think Site E, in my opinion, should be taken off. I think it's very limiting. We researched that very hard to give growth to the 4-H grounds there. There wasn't any room for growth. I think it's only about 6 acres.
Correct.
And I think if you built up, you're going to have problems with helicopters landing for the hospital and all that. So I think that should be scrapped. I'm curious if you guys did any talk with the hospital or with the city about the area between the companion animal clinic and the pin that has the little golfer on it. That whole field there at one point was available, but I know there is plans for future growth for stuff, or there has been talk of Canton growth in that area. But that was one of the areas that I had wondered if was being considered.
Okay. Yeah, I think it sure can be. Yeah.
And that is, there's planned moving forward type growth by the city with a cooperative thing between the city and Sanford, because Sanford actually owns that whole area right there. I can tell you that. Through the Economic Corporation, I know that there's pretty substantial development plans slated for the very near future out there.
Well, follow up, John, wouldn't you have to take down all those old buildings? You know, you got a barn, you got a bunch of old buildings up there, if that was even a consideration.
Right. From my understanding, I don't think it was going to ever be allowable to remove the old barn and the 2 old barns and the old hog building, because that was part of the agreement in the city getting that land. And then maybe Bill could correct me on that, but I think all the other buildings were put up at one point or another by the county, and I'm sure those could be removed. But again, I just think that area I just don't see how that'd be feasible for this project. So I guess, could we leave it on there? Yes, but I just don't see how it would ever pan out.
I would agree with you. I don't think that's even a starter up there. It's hard to get to. You know, how much consideration, if you're gonna put this somewhere and you're gonna build it in Canton, I mean, this isn't for the Cantonites, this is for all of Lincoln County. And you got all your people that have gotta come from the north, that have got to drive down here on a limited time basis, because that's what you hear. You know, I gotta drive all the way to Canton, what, true or not? So to me, you have to make this in the most accessible spot you can for individuals that wanna come in and to take care of their business. I mean, you know, if we put something else out there, we may even stick an office out there or something. We don't know that yet. But to me, we have to have the public access is a pretty prominent situation, for my consideration anyway, and I'm interested to hear from others.
I agree that the access is something that's gonna be really important in situations where we've got jurors who are showing up for jury duty. You might have 150 jurors coming from all different portions of Lincoln County. And so having something that's readily accessible, thinking about what streets need to be paved to get there, I think that's something that ought to be considered.
How many acres was this roughly?
This is roughly 6 acres, and knowing that we'd have to expand from there, either to the north or to the west or the east.
And all that land north of that is currently privately owned.
It is.
Ag land.
Yeah, it's ag land, yeah.
And also, the one thing we haven't looked at all in terms of zoning, in terms of where how this might fit in as well. So any other, think we should keep it on the list, or should we take that off the list?
I
I
thi-
wonder on site A, I don't know that the city would annex all the way out there, because they'd have to annex everything in between.
So maybe why don't we first close the discussion
Let's take E.
on E off? We
Is
take
there
E off.
anybody that wants to, what do you want to do with E? Somebody tell me. What do you think, Paul? I don't either. Is there anybody in favor of E? Okay? Red line it. Now which one you want to attack?
How about the one north of the school? Let's talk about that.
Now let's go to the school.
What are your thoughts on that? It's right north of the playing field, or fields, actually.
There's beside the school, you have the athletic complex. You have, just a little ways south, you have a nursing home on the east side. And from the talk that I've heard, also other potential future growth area around that. So,
Residential or business?
I've heard just residential at this point. But I also know that there's some, I believe it's sewer issues, like with a city hookup. Because I know that was a discussion by the city of Canton when they just redid that north end of Dakota Street there last summer, with getting rid of or sewer or something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was something related to that was potentially an issue or a costly issue too.
It sounds like it would need a lift station, according to the mayor.
Yeah, and that's why I think it had something to do with a lift station, yeah.
Okay. Which we don't know if the other ones have the same issue or not on that, but that's one that was, one
What
that
type
would,
of road access is there from the north of this site?
The school one D that we're talking about, that is a paved county road. Basically from the streetlight corner north, that's that street. And it goes to the north, and then this section is like just outside the city limits. On the east side, that would still be in city limits, but
But
west is
if
not.
you were coming from South Sioux Falls or Harrisburg.
You could come down to what we call like the Klondike Road, 276th Street, cut across to 481st Avenue, and then straight shoot down. That would actually be,
The Lake Elvin Road? Is
yeah,
that a
any
better
of
way to
those.
say it?
Yep, any of those. So if you're even semi-familiar with the county road paved system, I mean, That's the only, I live right up in that area on the north end of town. I basically, that's the only way I go to and from Sioux Falls, cause then I don't have to drive all the way through Canton to then make my way towards Sioux Falls, so. So it could potentially, yes, be fairly convenient for, like you say, you have a lot of, a big jury pool coming in for a trial or something.
But most of them may take the interstate and take 18.
Right, and that's why I made the comment that, if they're not familiar with the county road system, they would probably do the Highway 11, 115, the interstate, get them down to 18, and they're gonna come all the way through, Canton. So,
To be honest, I think the bigger sell and harder sell in this location is that it is right next to a school.
Yeah.
We are vastly different than a small county with maybe a couple people in a local jail anymore. The number of inmates and types of crimes that we have, I think, make it somewhat prohibited for the public to get behind a site like that.
I would agree. I mean, I think you're creating an unnecessarily issue by putting it next to a school, when you have other sites that are probably much more amenable than that one. How many of people would like to keep Site D?
they can go.
Okay, Dick, we're now down to Site C, working backwards.
Okay. Okay, so Site C, it's off of I'd say a minor arterial road compared to the others. What are the thoughts on that?
What did you say was the minimum acreage you were
We think
thinking?
20 acres probably. We'll hone into it more to get into the design, but
So this would just be at the low end of that, bottom end.
and this is approximately 20 acres too. It's all got to be verified in terms of even if the sellers are interested in selling, we may have some that are not interested in selling. The only one that we know for sure is the one that the county owns, Site A.
This one would be similar to Site A, where right now it's currently, yes, in the county. But the downside is that it also has houses right across the road. Where Site A, the houses are on the west side. This Site C, the houses are on the east side. And there are probably a half a dozen or better houses that go right up that. It's in the city limits, it's actually called West Street. But it's 480th Avenue.
So this was just one site that was, if we look at kind of the west side of town, we've got these three sites, the county land, R.C. Johnson's, and then the CHS site. And the other question I'd have is, should there be others out there? Should there be others on the west side that we consider? Given the
Was
improvements
there-
on 18, it seems like that would be
Was there anything like around the city industrial park area? I mean, I'm guessing that that's all privately owned land currently. Like where it's where Adams Thermal and then Johnson Feed, Terex, all those businesses up on what we call the Canton Industrial. Are there any potential options in that area for maybe purchasing land from a private? And off the top of my head, I do not know who owns any of that. Any of that land.
Another, I think, thing to consider too is just kind of the longer growth, long-term of this, because this is a long-term building, is what should be next to it? Should it be industrial? Should it be other businesses? What type of building should be housing? And thinking about how that might develop out in the next years. And also this could be, just throw this out it could be, if we're putting utilities in, this could spar other development, because just from going through here, there's not a lot of sites that have, utilities readily available in this town. So putting this in could, if we put it in a certain location, it could actually, spark other development if we.
What's the potential for What's the potential for housing to be built on high, if you have housing on virtually two sites, what is the potential for a housing development to be placed there? Paul, you got any?
If the sheriff's office is gonna be involved in this, I think it has to be on the west side of the railroad track. Because you come and you can sit there for a long time waiting for that train to get through.
Excellent point. You can wait 15, 20 minutes.
Well,
Yeah, we have. And I think, Paul, that's one of the major, thank you.
yeah.
That's a major consideration. Because when that train comes through and there's no alternative routes around, you just sit there.
Right.
Thank you, that's a great
It's moving
suggestion.
very fast when it goes through here.
That's exactly the kind of input we're looking for.
Yes,
Yeah.
Has there ever been any discussion about the east side of the Gate City Event Center? Like right where the Highway 18 sign is at there?
I believe that's also Darcy.
Yeah, that's
Johnson
also
land.
Darcy Johnson's land, I believe, too. There used to be that small house there that's not there anymore.
I kind of assumed it was, but I didn't really know anything about the flooding and the other site until today. It seems like that would put you farther away from the creek if there was flooding issues from the 14 flood, but
Yeah, because I believe that Darcy still owns like, so it's the B's area, and then it goes to I think he owns south of like Gate City Event, that whole area, but then it comes back up and swings around there on still just on the west side of that railroad track there. I believe Darcy still owns that. I know he did at one time.
So one thought would be is to, if we focus on Highway 18, and we kind of put the east boundary of the railroad, then we could explore to see what else is available within that area. That starts to help us narrow things down. And also, I think something that happens when you do a building like this, we'd call it an institutional grade building. It's a higher quality building, lasts a long time. It's not wood construction, it's gonna be steel and concrete, one form or another, that tends to attract other development that's nicer development like that as well. So I wanna make sure we're thinking of that as a community. And also there's the architect in me would suggest that this should be a prominently placed building, just because of what it is. It shouldn't be tucked away off in a kind of the far edge of town. It should be prominent of one form or another. That's just my own personal opinion on it.
That's just kind of why, I guess, as we kind of did this, through the process of elimination and kind of working backwards, in my mind, we've navigated ourselves, whether it was purposely or accidentally, back to our kind of original, where we think maybe the best spot, which is the Darcy Johnson land on the corner of 11 South and 18. I mean, I kind of saw us migrate back to that could potentially be, of these options, the best location, and kind of starting to meet all of the different criteria that's being discussed and the things that you just said, Dick, and yeah.
And what is is there a plan for the land south of the highway maintenance building? Is that a long-term hold for the county, or is that potentially a land swap?
I don't think that is designed, we don't have enough actual acreage in there. How many actual acres in there, Mike? The south of the highway shop. How many actual acres in there? That's very low,
The
too.
old state DOT building?
No, south of our new highway shop.
Oh, there's over 30 acres.
But how much of that, there's some wetlands in there.
Yeah, but that'd become all park or something of it. There's more than plenty.
Acres for that place?
But since looking at a location that's not in the growth plan of the city, you start putting a structure out on a location like that, where's your restaurant for your employees that are, you know, working the facility?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole intent when they built Courthouse in the center of the community, no, Sherry, I'm not using it, forget it. Well, they can read my lips. You gotta have that infrastructure around it as well. There has to be planned growth going to where this building's gonna be. I understand you need 20 acres, but there has to be a plan to get to that 20 acres as well for the other infrastructure that has to be to support that. It'll, you know, a little cafe, coffee shop across the street. That's part of a business or an entity like this to survive as well.
And what Sherry had started to say earlier about, remember, this ultimately has to be annexed into the city to meet
Yep.
state statutes of, you know, that this has to be in the city limits of the county seat. And I guess I don't know statutorily what all of the detail rules are, but I heard somebody say something about it has to be continuous
It has to
or
be
can't
contiguous.
be.
You can't leapfrog, you can't
No, you
create a corridor.
So, and so there's zero water and sewer out there, city-wise. So, yeah, to me, that's not even a potential site for us to continue looking at, and that's my opinion.
And if you ask me, you're looking at a site that's already flooded once, I'd keep
Well, you
looking.
wouldn't. So we really never gave that too much thought. If you look at Darcy Johnson's site, you're unable to get an access off of Highway 18, perhaps. That's a US highway. That'd be tough. They just don't give that. You also have State Highway 11, which you can get an access route off of fairly easy. That's one. Two, if you put sewer and water all the way out here, you are creating, in many ways, for not only the city of Canton, but for the county as well, you have a tremendous amount of now land that is available for commercial and/or potential housing, but I would guess more commercial than anything because that's what's out on the west side of Canton. So it has many, many positives in my mind. It has accessibility. It has, it really doesn't have any land issues. It is something that I think that has potential, spawns potential growth, and it has the accessibility on 18 to come back to the courthouse. I don't know. I've often thought that that would be the ideal spot.
If you're housing federal prisoners, you might have more of a chance of getting access on Highway 18 from the federal government.
Aha. I don't know. That's a good thought. So if we have, Dick, are we still looking at, so we have site A and B?
Correct.
Do you
And-
want to, how refined did you want to have this as far as to pick a site?
We
A
really don't-
site or
Yeah, we
alternate?
don't want to pick a site because we want to get it, so we've got several sites that we can do the research on and figure out what it costs. And, you know, and start talking to owners of the sites and see how, if they're interested in selling, and if so, on what terms.
Yeah.
And we definitely want to have, you know, several to consider. And as we
Wait.
get into it, there are deal killers on a fair amount of sites for a building like this, so we want to.
In my mind right now, the way I would see it is B your primary and C your secondary. Just based off of the conversation that we've had with all of these sites. So if you're looking for two, those would be my two recommendations.
Which would be site B.
B as the primary, which
Yeah.
is the obvious one, and then C is the secondary one.
And then we can hone in and see if there's other properties in that area. Because I think your comment about the railroad, I think that's really germane to the whole conversation here. I think that's real important. So we can look to see what other properties are in that area. We've taken the input that it's, so it'd be west of the railroad tracks. And Judge Howman suggested that it might be better for housing federal prisoners if it's now or if it's later. if it's got, more closer access to Highway 18. And then how about the comment that I brought up about having it be prominent? How important is that? How important is it to have it be and by prominent, we mean that it's not hidden back behind something else where it's a little more, for lack of a better word, more of a grand site where it's got.
As a longtime homegrown Canton person, I see that as a big advantage to the city of Canton, as to proudly display it as the county seat of Lincoln County. So I would put it high, to answer your question directly.
But others, is it important? It's not, it typically the site will cost more, that's why we want to have several options we look at. Or maybe we let the numbers talk, we look at sites and then show you the numbers, you can start to focus on it. One other that I'll bring up, just because it has probably been, discussed heavily, is, is there any possibility where it's close to this building, the building we're in right now? To the west, I'm sure it's been debated. I can drive around and probably guess where it might be, but should that be considered? That probably means going up rather than having it all one level. And some people have strong opinions on that. Either one of the judges have an opinion on that in terms of 1-story, 2-story, or better. The sheriff may have some opinions on it. Others might have opinions on it. But I throw that out there, and I know it's because right now we're at the stage, we just want to look at everything. We want to look at what are all the options. Let's make sure we're considering everything, because there's no bad ideas right now.
I don't
Another
think
3 or 4
you
weeks.
take it off the table, because I know very early on, it was one of our, early with the first couple meetings of this committee, once we were formed, that was actually kind of the direction we had initially were heading towards, was something right here on campus, so to speak.
Okay.
And then the Darcy Johnson thing happened, and then we really kind of refocused, and the immediate one kind of just got, I won't say got dropped, but it just wasn't really discussed much after that, it seems like.
My recollection was that was because of the size of what we'd need. You'd have to build a
Yep.
multiple stories building
Yeah.
to
It's,
house all of those facilities.
it's more of a city block than it is a portion of a block. And that involves usually a fair amount of time of assembling the property, unless we got willing sellers that are ready to jump
Dick, how
in.
much cheaper is it to go up, or is it cheaper to go out?
Kind of depends on the building type. We get often asked that, and it's probably a little bit less to go up. But it all depends on the building type and also the property value then and how much land you need. You almost gotta look at it on the whole. Like is a single-story building on this site, how does that compare to a multi-story building on another site? But that's the analysis we'll get to. So we'll have, real, good intelligence on that.
Okay.
So is it something we should consider, or should we just take it off the table? I think that's kind of the question for the night. If there's, John, you're smiling, so if there's, you got any thoughts on it? I mean, we'd want to.
John?
One of my. So it has been heavily discussed. Ideally, once upon a time, we thought maybe it'd be great to go into the park here, but we know that that's not really a possibility. It would be real difficult with the available land between here and, with the bank kind of presents a problem. Outside of that, I would guess most of those businesses probably could be bought. There was talk, could we move south across the highway? That kind of was put to bed pretty quickly because we didn't think much of Canton would be on board with that. If we took over some of those older buildings and just, took over a city block over there. There's some things that are attractive about that, but politically, I don't think Canton would buy off on it.
And John, just as an FYI, Great Western Bank down there on the corner is probably gonna be coming up for sale, because they just announced that they are closing that branch. It was just announced, because Great Western was bought
So-
out by another,
Yeah, Capital Bank,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's supposedly what's happening, is that they are closing the Canton branch.
So basically, you would have to, in my opinion, you'd have to go west. And I guess if that piece of property could get put into the picture, it looks doable. But then again, you have to go back to the idea of putting a jail in a very residential area. And
And also, it is, the railroad then is a factor as well.
correct. So that's, we just heavily discussed it. It kind of just didn't seem real feasible.
Okay. Is the railroad enough to override consideration of it?
In my opinion, from somebody that drives in here every day, yes. I'm stuck behind that train sometimes, the same train twice on days. There's a possibility of being stuck behind the same train 3 times.
Yeah. Canton's a switch, railroad wise. It's the only one in the county. So that's a very real and very painful thing that Cantonites have to deal with.
So is that something we should spend time exploring, or should we take it off the list? We bring it up, we didn't have it on the list here, but the reason I bring it up, because it always comes up on these projects, is there's something adjacent, so if we think it has any possibility, or if you think. the
As
railroad
much
is
as
issues.
I kind of like the idea of it, I think it's just, would take a lot of energy, and we'd still decide not to use it.
How about,
I don't know that it
Schmidt?
serves for long-term growth.
correct?
And I think City of Canton may change, but I just don't believe it. It has the potential to serve as long a reach, if we're looking at 10, 20 years from now. I think that we're better served by putting it on the west side and having a city grow to us, as opposed to try to put it in the middle of this area. Although you could, John, we could make a case, the bowling alley could go, this could go, you could, but you're dealing with timelines as well, and you're trying to put this thing out to the public as quickly as possible, with as much detail as possible. And if you stayed with this particular area, I mean, you'd be dealing with guesstimates and timelines and all sorts of things. So, I don't know. I just think we should take it off and put it to bed.
Any other thoughts on that? I think the growth argument is a real strong one, given the growth of the county, in terms of how that would expand out.
Anybody else here? You're awfully quiet over here. Paul, how about you?
Well, I think it needs to be west of town. I'm just
Yep.
in wherever west of town. I talked about the sheriff, but then our ambulance sits down on, I don't know, is that Cedar? Is that what that street is? So I don't know. But I think it's more important. Well, they're both important.
Great. Judge Rasmussen, you've lived here your whole life.
Yeah.
What's your verdict?
I agree. I don't think it really fits to put right in the middle of town. The other issues you have is then how do we incorporate this facility with that one again? And we've already had enough issues 13 years ago when we added on to this one. I don't think it's feasible for long-term growth, and putting it right in the middle of a residential area on the north side and then also on east and west sides isn't probably ideal. And again, if we are going to build it, I think Paul's point of having it west of the railroad tracks makes sense. The sheriff's office deals with trains and whatever now, but if we are talking about incorporating a jail where there will be prisoners coming and going for a number of reasons, I think it would make more sense to not have a transport van or something else stuck behind 20 minutes of trains.
And that is working in emergency services. That is a very real thing that we've just learned to have to deal with. And sometimes it works knowing the back ways and scooting around a train. But other times, one single train can literally have every intersection in and out of town going west and going south blocked, where we've literally had no choice but to sit on Highway 18 in front of Casey's there with our lights on, waiting for a train to pass before we could continue on to an emergency. It's just something that the emergency services people in Canton have learned to have to deal with.
And I think
Fortunately,
you
it doesn't
can-
happen real often.
Yeah, you
but it
can learn to
happens.
deal with it, but if we're starting something new, it'd be
Right.
nice to take that element out of the equation, I guess is a fair way to say it.
Okay.
I think as a citizen looking from the outside in, I think it would be a hard sell on this one too. It's just the general public getting behind. I just don't see in the heart of town in this where there'd be a lot of pros to this or where it could be convinced to go that way.
That's right.
So I think that's an uphill battle.
Our committee was in Brookings and looked at their jail built right next to their courthouse, right downtown, or, you know. And of course, there's housing all around that, but they spent extra money and they had to get the same granite as what the courthouse was built from back in the 40s or 30s or 40s, whatever that was. So that cost them, I don't know what, he threw out a number, $1 million.
It was $1 million, I believe.
$1 million to get the same granite. So, I mean, the buildings look the same, and you probably wouldn't know that was a jail just driving by it. But it's still the jail, and it's right in the midst of town, right next to housing and everything there. But it cost more money.
So is there consensus to take that off the table? And the reason we're bringing it up again is because it'll come up later if we don't bring it up now, so we might as well, we'll talk about it and see if we should research it or not.
I think it's off the table.
I agree.
So do you have consensus on that, to take it off?
Anybody not in favor of taking it off? Looks like it's gone.
Sounds good. So I think if I were to sum up the evening, what we do is have our marching orders go to look at if there's other sites that are west of the railroad.
Okay.
And we'll meet with the city and see what else. The city was very helpful on our tour. Mayor was very helpful and knows the history of it very well, knows the landowners and knows, just is very helpful. So we can look at that. How far west, what's the boundary? How far west would you go? Would you go west of 11?
I think it has to go as far as the city will enact.
And that's what I was just gonna say. I
Yep.
don't think you can go any further than where the city would be able to continue and be willing,
To annex.
just in speaking with, unofficially with, the mayor of Canton, they said they don't anticipate any trouble annexing up to Highway 11 South. But they've never been asked the question if it was further west of. But again, you'd be looking at, keeping it continuous. And then there is no water, sewer west of that. I know there's water now, at least to 11 and 18, because that's where South Lincoln Rural came up to hook in, because Canton just contracted and is buying some water from South Lincoln Rural, and that's where they came to.
Okay.
And sewer would need some upgrades.
So we'll meet with the city, meet with the mayor, talk through how far they would go west. And see if
What's
we can-
what's the boundaries for the fire department, Chad?
As far as,
I mean, you look at, if you're gonna annex, you gotta be able to sewer, water, police, and fire protection. So,
Fire is both city
You-
and rural,
yeah.
so that would
so
be a,
Highway 11 seems like a good dividing line, Dick. And is land south of there, and there is land north of there for potential.
That's actually very helpful if we can really, look at every property that's between the railroad and Highway 11.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the next steps on this, as far as the site selection, I think we probably should plan to meet again, probably the week of maybe the 21st or maybe the 28th. That'll be the next, we want to have this narrowed down for the architects before they get engaged. And they'll have a certain amount of programming they need to do, so they won't need the day that they start, but we should use that as a goal. We don't want to hold up the architects on it. And if you noted back in the schedule, the part that they had in yellow was the selection process and of the architect and the contractor, and then followed by the design process, and then doing the cost modeling after that. That's really the critical path. So, and this site thing isn't on that, so we want to make sure it stays off of it, so we can not be delayed because of site. And this may go quite a ways down the road before a site is actually selected, because we need to get all the facts on it, and then it's got to be negotiated, and sometimes you start a negotiation with one party, and it, for whatever reason, falls through. It might go to another, but we want to make sure we've got, several sites to consider. All right, I think that concludes.
So
we
what
needed.
date were you talking about, Dick? 20?
Well, if we had the week of, if we looked at the week of the 21st or the 28th, possibly the 28th, that week, or we could even do it, before, we could do it the week of the 14th as well. It's just a matter of schedules and trying to work it in. Maybe what we do is we send out something on email and get
Okay.
everybody to check schedules and see what we can make it work. But Tuesday evening at 7, is that, if that's going to be the kind of the default time on it, we can see which weeks work and how many people are available. And also we want to get, just open it up if there's, commissioners or other people in the community that have thoughts, we want to open it up. Now is the time to give consideration to whatever it might be, so. So maybe we'll send something out from our office or through Sherry, and we'll get a date, another date set. Okay? Okay, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dick. So, tomorrow afternoon. Okay. Or is there a better time this week? Is there a better time this week?
Nope.